I have always loved to be outdoors, even with friends or family, especially with my family when we often went to several natural parks across the country, sometimes for summer vacation, or even just went for a hike in the local forest. But most part when I was with my friends, we often spent time by the local park. And it was one of the most favorite spots in our hometown in Oklahoma. I'm not going to give you a precise location just for my privacy, but my name is Chelsea. I'm by now 20 years old, but this happened to me when I was just 19 years old after summer. Like I said, I had always loved to be outdoors, so even if it was just at the local park with friends or family. But this time I was supposed to be meeting up with some friends at the local park for just do some spend some time. But when I did show up at the park around noon, I was expecting to find either of my friends there already or even to be a bit earlier. We were supposed to meet around 12 or 12:30, something like that. But I was apparently the first one to show up. So I went to the bench where we are set to meet at. But as the time went on, I waited for almost maybe 15 or 20 minutes, but none of my friends did even showed up. So I started texting my friends just to be asking if they're even showing up. But turned out some of my close friends that I was supposed to be meeting up had got some other plans in mind, like some of them had been helping around some chores at home, or they couldn't just show up at all. And since was already at the park, and since there was a nice day, and since, like I mentioned earlier, I love to be at the park. So I texted my friends, it was fine, we can always do this some other time, and I decided to stay at the park. Since I love to be there, I had a lot of fun memories from this particular park alone, with friends or family. Since this park wasn't even that big, to be honest, it was probably a medium-sized park, maybe as I would say maybe two football field size, perhaps. It was a small, decent size, like a small pond in the middle of the park. So I decided to go there to just sit by the pond and just watching the ducks, having a good time. And as I was sitting down by the pond, I did notice there were no much other people around the area at the time, which was fine by me though. But it happens that I did run into some older people by the pond, just saying hello, just have a good conversation with them. And some of the older people I actually had started a very good friendship with. Turn out, some of the older people were actually old friends of my grandparents. So, at least, I didn't mind talking to them because I saw them like almost my second set of grandparents. But today, the bench that with them I usually see my older friends was empty. So I sat down there, and I don't know exactly how long, but I did notice that there was someone walking because I heard this crunching sound in the distance. I looked and saw there was this man in his late 30s, I would say between 35 or 40, give or take. He was just having a good confidence. He was just walking around in the park, I thought. But then he saw me and he walked up to me and he just asked if he could sit down since he needed to rest for a moment, which I didn't see anything wrong with. So I moved over and he sat down, and at first it was quiet. But he introduced himself as Bob. He told me that he was 37 and he was local. He asked me if I was also from the area. I wish I said yes. I told him that I was 19. He asked what I was doing this nice day at the park alone. Well, this might have been would have been a red flag normally, but he hasn't even presented himself as a creep or anything or any dangerous red flag signs yet. But it would eventually come to that. But I'm a little bit ahead of myself. I told him that I was originally supposed to meet with some friends, but then they all canceled the plans, so I decided to be here myself. And then I asked him what he was doing at the park. He said about the same thing, except that he usually go to the park himself just to have a good time, since it always feels calm. Sometimes he just walk around the park, maybe 2 turns, and then walk home or something. Or just sit there to just have a good conversation with other people. But this is the thing is, he told me that he usually is at park almost daily basis, well, when he is off work or even or in the summer break or something like that. But the funny part is, I have often been at the park quite often, sometimes during the summer break, almost daily basis, with other friends or family or alone. I had never seen him at the park, but it makes sense. We could have been at the park at 2 different times of the day, which never cross a path. Makes a lot of sense. And we started talking about what we thought like to do at the park, and he did mention about his childhood while he was growing up at this park was a lot different when he in his childhood, which I was actually interested to know more about it. I know that from my parents, who also was born in this town, that this park had always been this big, but there had been a lot of different things like in this place. One time there was this small scene nearby where people could perform or even have a play, but now it is long gone. And I was actually quite interested to know more about this. But the conversation would eventually turn a little more personal, like really personal. He asked me if I had a boyfriend, which I didn't. And I was honest about it, and I said no, I was single at the time. He asked me if I was in college, since I was 19, since I by now finished high school, and I said no. And even though this is not relevant, I'm not in college at all. I never had plans to go to it, just saying. And then he asked me if I was considered being dating older men, like in his age. I was taken a little bit aback about that. That should be another red flag. But I said with a chuckle, no, I never even have thought about it. Then he took almost like an interest in saying, then he asked me right there if I would like to go out with him to on a date. I was very hesitating, but I said no. Sorry, I'm not interested. But then I decided to leave. But before I could even stand up and walk away, he grabbed my arm and said, "Please, I like you. You're an interesting person. I'd like to go out with you." Then I snapped at him and said, "Please, sir, let me go of my arm. I would like to go." But he then looked firmly angry at me like, "No, young lady, you and I are going on a date right now." He screamed at me. I was really adamant that I was not had any intention to go with him. And and I really was firmly not to that. And I tried to struggle to release his grip from my arm, but he was strong, like really strong. And this would have been turned a lot more creepier, and I managed to loose up his arm after I said, "Okay, fine, I will go with you." And he suddenly started letting off my arm go, at least I felt about it. At that moment, I really had only a few seconds managed, if I could. So as I stood up, he still had the grip on my arm, but not as tight. I managed to strike off my arm from his grip and just took off running. I was like, he was probably like stunned that I actually pretended. But to my horror, I heard him running after me, yelling to me that to stop or I will feel or I would be punished. I was really crazy of terror this time. I was like, how in the world can I even do anything to deserve this? Normally, around this time, around 1 p.m. at the park, it usually would be a lot more people. And I was running around hoping to find any place to hide because I don't know what to do. Clearly, I could just stop and call for 911. But the thing is, I was terrified. I couldn't think clearly enough. But as I stopped after a couple of minutes of running, I first believed that I was now safe. I didn't hear him yelling at me anymore. I thought maybe he had just given up. But I just stood there for just less than 2 minutes. I heard him almost behind me like, now you won't run. And then I could almost feel he grabbed by my hair. I had my hair in a ponytail by the time when this happened. But as he was pulling my hair backwards, I almost stumbled backwards. And then I heard his loud male voice in a distance. Hey, what are you doing? That took him off guard. And I could actually recognize the voice immediately. That was Adam. Adam was one of the older people that I had to get to know from the park, which were one of my grandparents' friends. Adam was, well, even though he was 65 years old by the time, he was still very fit old man. Here's a slight detail. He's as like 6'2", and this Bob man, he was like maybe 5'5" or 5'6", I believe. I was around maybe just 5 feet tall myself. And Adam, he was a former Marine. And he was still training himself, always keep himself in check and well shape. Adam then started running, but Bob claimed that I was his girlfriend and that we would just have an argument. But Adam just managed to run up to him and said to let the hand off my hair, and that he knows me real enough, and that he knows for sure. And he said that I know for certain this young lady is not your girlfriend. You were more than twice her age. Bob took that as offensive and started like to pick a fight with Adam. And boy, what he didn't expect what happened. As Bob tried to hit him, he managed to hit him in the face once, but Bob fell to the ground himself, like literally. Adam had him in a chokehold, and after he was almost stopped fighting, he just dropped to the ground, and I was told by Adam to call for 911, which I did. By the time when I was calling, Adam's wife and a few other people actually was walking up to us, and even Adam's wife was quite surprised and quite, well, curious to know what's exactly been happening. And I didn't know exactly what to tell them because I was on a call, and after the call was over, I explained as best as I could because I was terrified. And I mean, having the adrenaline pumping in the veins of my body during this, I was still in a shock. But Adam, who had picked up Bob once again and hold him tight in his arm behind his back so that he couldn't escape. And since it was a small, decent-sized city, or I would say maybe a medium size, with a population of maybe almost 20,000 people, and the police showed up and they took me aside to have this conversation to be in question of what was happened, to get more detail, and they even asked for Adam for his side, but sadly, since he was there only for a shorter part of it, but his part was enough to give them more details. They later found that Bob actually had a warrant for assault in the past, and he was also carrying a knife, which, frankly, I wasn't even aware of. Even to this day, I wonder why he even tried to use the knife at me when he had me in this by the when he had grabbed my arm by the bench earlier. But I'm glad he didn't. And since he had a warrant for his arrest, he was arrested. And I thanked Ada for his help for saving my life. And he said he saw me as his own daughter, and he could not stand, especially since, like I mentioned, Adam and his wife were old friends to my grandparents, and they could not stand to see their old friend's granddaughter being attacked and perhaps even murdered or something. And so Adam and his wife took me home, and my parents was quite surprised to see them there, and they asked what happened. So Adam told them just part of his briefly, and my mom was horrified. But likely though, I was expecting maybe to be would have been being summoned for some form of a trial for this Bob man. Well, that didn't even need it because he went straight to jail apparently, and he was perhaps I believe it was around 12 years for his assault and for carrying a weapon that he claimed that later revealed that he was going to use it to hurt me and even kill me if he didn't get my if it wasn't going according to plans. So Bob, you stayed away from me. Thank you, Adam.